Okay. So I'm going to talk about, I think, the negative exponent rule and the product rule. So we'll do the product rule first. So the product rule of exponents says that when you have like bases, meaning the bases of the exponent are the same, so here's your base, here's your exponent. When your bases are the same and you're multiplying them, you just add the exponents, okay? So if I have x to the third times x to the third, I'm going to get x to the 3 plus 3, which is x to the 6th. And to me, the easiest way to remember that is because every base, whether it's a variable or a constant, right? So every letter and every number has an automatic invisible exponent of 1, okay? So when you square the number, right, it's because you're saying 6 times 6, right, which is 6 squared. So you're adding the exponents. If you have x times x, you have x squared because you have x to the 1 times x to the 1, which equals x squared. So if you just remember that, you can usually remember that you're just adding the exponents. Okay, if you were multiplying them, it would be x to the 1, and that wouldn't make any sense. So let's try a more complicated problem. So let's say you have x squared, y to the third, z squared, y to the fifth, x cubed, okay? So if you wanted to simplify that, the thing that I do, the way I do it is I get the first base and I say, okay, are there any other x's? And I just put an underline. Yep, there's one, there's one. So x squared times x to the third is x to the 2 plus 3. So I have x to the fifth. And then I cross those off. And then I take the next one. Okay, this is a y. Here's another y. So y to the third times y to the fifth is y to the 3 plus 5, which is y to the 8th. And then the last one, I cross those off because sometimes you can get really long ones, so you want to make sure you cross them off. And then z squared. And the rule with exponents is you lead with the highest one. So technically, I think, we'll leave it like that. I'm not exactly sure. I'll look it up before I make the next video and make sure that I think the one with the highest exponent is supposed to go first, but it might also just be in alphabetical order. I don't remember. All right, so that's how you do that. That's the product rule. So the product rule is you add the exponents. When you have like bases and you're multiplying is product, right? The product of two numbers is you multiplying them. So the next one, let's do negative exponents before we get into the quotient rule. So the rule of negative exponents, if I have x to the negative 1, anytime there's a negative exponent, it means inverse. So you're supposed to invert the number. And inverting a number is you turn it upside down. So any number or letter, any number or variable is automatically over 1, right? So if you have 5, you can also write it as 5 over 1 because any number divided by itself is just 5, okay? So any variable, which stands for any number, is automatically, you can write it over 1. So when you have x to the negative 1, that means you flip it. Because in math, you're not supposed to leave anything to a negative exponent. So when you're done simplifying, if you have a negative exponent, you have to get rid of that, or it's not correct. It's not mathematically sound. So you don't want to leave a negative exponent. So this just equals 1 over x to the first power, which is the same thing as 1 over x. So anytime there's a negative exponent, you have to flip the base, whatever the base is, okay? So if you have x to the negative 3, that's going to equal 1 over x to the third. You keep the exponent, but you just get rid of the negative. The same thing goes for if you have x over y to the negative 2. That's different, but it's the same. So I always tell people is flip it first and then deal with the number, okay? So this, I would first do y over x, and then I would deal with the 2. But all that happens with this 2 is because these are in parentheses, this 2 gets distributed to both of them. So this just becomes y squared over x squared. But we'll deal with the parentheses thing soon. So this is negative exponents. So let's just practice. Okay, anytime you have a base with a negative power, this is the power, you have to flip it. So if I have a fraction and I have x squared y to the negative 3 z over 5, let's keep it simple, okay? If I want to simplify this and make it mathematically sound, I have to rewrite it without the negative exponent. So this flips, just this one piece flips over. So this is going to be x squared z over y to the 5y to the third, right? Because we write the constant out front. So negative powers, you have to invert them. It just means the inverse. On your calculator, eventually you'll use the inverse button, and the inverse is just x raised to the negative 1 because that means inverse. It happens, I think, in trig and algebra 2 also. So maybe you want to do one more. Let's say I have x to the negative 2. Ooh, let's do this way. Times x to the 5th. Now what do I do? You just add them still, okay? You're just adding negative 2 and 5. So what's negative 2 plus 5 or 5 minus 2? 5 minus 2 is x to the 3rd. So when you have these combos, you're still adding them. You could go through all the trouble of inverting it, but then that happens with the quotient rule, which we're going to talk about next. Yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. Let me know if you have more questions on that. All right, I'll do the next one in the next video.